like that. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the new Primary Arms GLX 1:6 first focal plane. This one here has the ACSS Griffin M-6, basically a mil-dot reticle. But before we get into the video, if you want to help us out personally, you can, of course, like, share, and subscribe, as all that is free and does help us out quite a bit. On top of that, go ahead and comment your favorite Primary Arms product in the comments down below. Now, on top of that, there's also Subscribestar, which is basically just a pro to a Patreon, and on my website, in theory, there could be some short boy 308 uppers as well as some longer 308 uppers. Now, there were also supposed to be 6.5 Creedmoor uppers launching at the exact same time. However, Ballistic Advantage decided to send me the wrong barrel, so we're waiting on those to actually come in, get tested, assembled, all that sort of fun stuff. So go ahead and check out the website. Those should be live. The video will be in a couple weeks once I actually get the proper 6.5 Creedmoor barrels in. Now, full disclosure on the GLX 1:6 is that I do have a relationship with Primary Arms. They have actually sent me some optics. In fact, I believe the GLX 2.5 to 10 behind me was sent out for them for me to review eventually. I've also reviewed a lot of their other products. I've bought a lot of their products. This one here I did not buy. However, this one here was actually bought by a customer of mine because I am also a dealer for Primary Arms optics. But the deal was that I get to test it out for a little bit and review it before I ship it off to them. Now, with that being said, this is much more of a short-term review, as the kind gentleman, the same one who loaned me the PWS Mark 111 upper, didn't want me to hold on to this optic for another 3 or 4 months. Usually when I do a review, it's at least 1,000 rounds, several 4, 5, 6 range trips over the course of 2 to 4 months before I bring it to table. This one here I have only had for about 2 weeks or so. So the round count on this is going to be a little bit lower, somewhere between 300 and 350 rounds, and of course much less time, though I've still squeezed in several range trips and taken it out to a little bit of distance. So keep that in mind for this review. I've had this optic for less time and less use than other optic reviews in the past. Now, getting into the optic itself and what makes it special, if you don't know, Primary Arms optic lines are very simple. You have their SLX, GLX, and PLX. They're silver, gold, and platinum. The GLX 1:6 is, of course, in their gold line. The SLX is all Chinese-made optics, I believe, and then the GLX, I believe all of them are made in the Philippines. And then the platinum goes up to Japanese glass, internals, all that sort of fun stuff. In general, there is a noticeable step up from Chinese to Philippines in terms of the glass quality. I can't really speak as to whether the construction is really any better or if there's, better QC or QA going on there, but I do know that you get a considerable step up in terms of optical quality when comparing Philippines glass to Chinese glass. Now, that is going to be the main drawing point, the main selling point of this optic, is that you get all of the Primary Arms / ACSS features, but with much higher optical quality. Now, getting into the basics of the optic, of course, this is a 30mm main tube, 1:6 by 24 first focal plane. We have an optic that is about 10.25 inches long, which is not terribly long, and we have an optic that's just over 20 ounces. Now, 20 ounces is decent for an LPVO. There are definitely lighter options on the market. You can get LPVOs, 14, 15, 16 ounces on the super light range, but 20 ounces still isn't bad, and it's not like a pig like a lot of the Vortex LPVOs. Now, on top of that, this specific model is the M6 mil reticle. They also have a version that just uses the Raptor reticle, which the Raptor reticle is basically just a BDC out to 800 yards. This is much more of a mil grid system. Now, with that, you do have capped windage and elevation that are in 0.1 mil increments, which for me is very precise. They do use steel on steel adjustments, so they are very durable in theory for long-term applications. On top of that, the elevation also comes with a tacticap. So if you'd rather dial than use the mil grid, it does come with a turret that is very low profile and still allows you to dial. So whether you want to just use your cap turrets, use it as set and forget, and then rely on the mil grid / auto ranging features, or if you want to dial, it gives you both of those options, which is, again, a nice touch. On the left-hand side, we have our Illumination Dial that goes from 1 to 10, and it does have an offsetting in between each one, which is quite nice. The adjustments, the knurling, the rubbers, all feels quite good. On top of that, the illumination is okay. It's definitely not what I would consider daylight bright. Not that that's really all that important in an LPVO. but it's definitely lagging behind a lot of other cheaper optics in terms of illumination. So if you're somebody that just likes fire hot illumination like I tend to, then that's a bit of a letdown, but again, for its intended application, not that big of a deal. Now moving back from there, we have our magnification ring, which is very nicely machined and knurled. On top of that, it comes with a removable and replaceable throw lever. Now the throw lever, I believe they're actually going to be coming out with different designs. So if you like a more slim one, a bigger one, a taller one, so on and so forth, I believe they will actually have aftermarket app options for you to swap out your throw lever, which is again a nice touch. Or if you just don't want it at all, you can just remove it. Now other than that, the throw itself definitely takes a good amount of force. It's very smooth. It feels high quality, which is again nice. And the last thing on the back of the optic is a very nicely rubber coated diopter for again adjusting the reticle to your eyes. Now on top of that, the entire time that I was testing this, I had this in the Warn 193 super high mount. So one of the best, not really budget mounts, but one of the best mounts for around $100 that actually does put the optic in a very, very comfortable height for a LPVO, and still makes it usable for taking it out to distance. Now getting into the eye relief, eye box, and field of view on the GLX 1-10, it's quoted on their website as 3.3 to 3.5 inches. However, that is incorrect. The eye relief is actually quite a bit longer. And in fact, if you kind of bring your head in just a little bit, you actually start to get a lot of scope shadow. So it's not really what I would consider 3.3 to 3.5. On 1X, it's much more like 4 to 5, 6, 7 inches, because you can, of course, always back out and get a little bit of that scope shadow. However, at 1X, the optimal distance is probably closer to 4.5 inches than 3.5 inches. And in fact, again, if you bring your head forward at all, you start to get that scope shadow. And even at 6X, it does, of course, tighten up a little bit, but you still want to be a good bit off the optic, as soon as you move your head forward, you start to get that scope shadow. So I'm not sure if that was just a typo or if I got one that just has a little bit wonky of an eye relief, but you definitely want to put this optic as far forward as you can with as big of a cantilever mount as you can, at least in this current configuration. If I had a stock with, you know, a longer length of pull, it would be a little bit more comfortable, as I have this on the last ring of the upper receiver. So overall, the eye relief is very good. It's a very long eye relief scope for a 1-6, which is quite nice. The field of view is 103 feet at 100 yards, which if you know my scale, anything up above 100 is good. Anything above 110, excellent, so on and so forth. So while the field of view isn't all that great when compared to other LPVOs, even much cheaper LPVOs, as we'll get into, the 1X performance plus glass quality plus longer eye relief are all worthy trade-offs. Now, getting into the glass quality itself, as I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a noticeable step up from basically every budget Chinese-made optic on the market. Basically, you'll instantly notice that it's brighter, it's crisper, you get better contrast, just everything within the image that you see in the glass is better. So while, yes, other optics might have better field of views and be much cheaper, you often, even with that greater field of view, get much less detail, much less information, even though you're seeing less within the image. All that is to say, the glass quality on the primary arms GLX 1-6 is very good and definitely justifies the $700 price category. One of the only optics that I personally know off the top of my head where you can get as good or better glass quality is the Vortex Viper PST Gen 2 1-6. However, that optic is a pig with a very simplistic reticle. Now, I personally love the PST Gen 2 1-6. I would buy one every day for $450, $500, somewhere in that range. However, I understand for the average person, they're much bigger, heavier, and overall a little bit less usable than something like this. Now, getting into the ACSS M6 mil reticle that comes on the GLX 1-6, the main part of this reticle is going to be a 1x1 mil grid. Now, within the mil grid, it is viewable at all times without the reticle, so not like some optics where the further you zoom in, you actually lose some of your grid. With the ACSS M6 reticle, you're always viewing the full reticle. So you get a 1x1 mil grid all the way out to 10 mils. Now, 10 mils in general with a 14.5/16-inch 5.56 will get you out to about 800 yards. Personally, I'm a big fan of mil grids or MOA grids, anything like that, as it's easier to translate to odd calibers, odd barrel length, 7.62x39, 6.5 Grendel, 308, short barrels. I do tend to shoot a lot of short barrel guns, and BDCs don't always line up perfectly. Some are very close, some are very ammunition dependent. So for me personally, I like to see a mill grid, as with this optic, we were able to take it out to about 420, 430 yards without issue just by using the mill grid within the reticle and just some quick math. Now, this being an ACSS reticle, there are also at least a half dozen different auto ranging features built in. So in the center of the reticle, we of course have our chevron. Some people love it, some people hate it. I tend to be a fan for its precision, and especially in a mill grid where I'm not using the tacticap, I can just use the mill grid, which is going to be very precise, very small, and then for fast acquisition or for very refined placing of shots like accuracy testing or zeroing, you can use that very fine point of infinite precision. On the outside of that, you of course have your horseshoe of death, your donut of death, whatever you want to call it, which helps to draw your eye to the center. On top of that, on the outskirts of that, you have horizontal auto ranging. So basically you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 yard auto ranging for vertical height. And then within the reticle itself, you have shoulder width auto ranging. So you have, I believe in the mill grid, you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or something like that, so on and so forth. So again, just about everything you could want within a reticle, you get with the M6. You have your mill grid if you like that sort of thing for your drop and your wind. You also have multiple auto ranging plus your fast acquisition centerpiece. Now, the main reason why I don't like first focal plane in LPVOs is almost every single time the reticle is too small at 1x or it's not bright enough, some combination therein, and it's very difficult to use up close because again, that reticle gets too small at 1x. Now, fortunately, with the primary arms GLX 1-6 with the M6 reticle, they shoved enough stuff into the center of the reticle to still make it very fast to acquire up close. The reason that I like LPVOs is because you can run them up close on 1x and then go all the way out to 4, 5, 600 yards without much issue. And the point of an LPVO for me personally is to crush just about any target within that 0 to 600 yard envelope. So again, on 1x, while the reticle is certainly smaller, the horseshoe is thick enough. There's enough junk thrown into the center to allow you to very quickly acquire it and very quickly put that on target. On top of that, like I mentioned earlier, you get a very good glass quality. On top of that, we haven't talked about this yet, but the 1x performance is a very flat, very true image. So again, while the field of view is not great, like we've mentioned, you get a very flat 1x image. A lot of other optics will have a much greater field of view, but then it'll kind of do a fisheye effect around the edges or you'll get distortion. So it's not necessarily the most natural looking 1x image. Fortunately, on the GLX 1-6, you get a very good, very natural looking 1x image. What that means is you get a reticle that works between 0 and 600 yards. You also get a very nice image in terms of just optical quality, on top of the fact there's very little distortion, there's very little warping going on. Now again, it is still many panes of curved glass, so it's not a true 1x image, but it is very close to the best 1x on an LPVO that I've seen. It's definitely in the top 3 to top 5 of all LPVOs that I've seen in terms of its 1x flatness, the natural looking of the image, which again will make it a little bit easier and a little bit faster to acquire targets. Now, while I have been very positive on the primary arms GLX 1-6, specifically the Griffin M6 version, there's kind of one problem with it. And that's the fact that you can get basically an identical feature set for half the price in the SLX line. And that is actually going to be probably the GLX's main competition is going to be the SLX line, because the SLX line again gives you a lot of different reticle options, 1-6, second focal plane, first focal plane, 1-8, second focal plane, first focal plane, so on and so forth, with a lot of different reticle options in there for, again, about half the cost. So for some people, this is going to not offer much more in terms of features, except for, of course, the much better glass, and they're willing to sacrifice the glass quality for, again, half the cost. For some people, the SLX line is going to be, you know, too budget, too cheap, doesn't have the optical quality that they want. Maybe it has all the other features that they want, but just not the glass quality. Well, the GLX will perfectly satisfy that because it does, again, it does remedy basically one drawback of all budget optics is that they're budget optics made in China, and Chinese glass is not all that great. It's definitely good, it's definitely usable and come a long way, but it's still not quite as good as other glass on the market. So it's kind of in a weird spot. If you are interested in primary arms optics and you're on a budget, you're probably still going to go with the SLX line. However, if you weren't interested in the SLX line because it was just too cheap, well, then the GLX will fill that niche. And if you're somebody who was never interested in primary arms optics, you don't need the reticles or whatever features that you're looking for, well then the GLX isn't going to do much for you. Now me personally, being a cheapskate and a certified poor, I don't know if I could drop $700 on the GLX 1-6. It's possible that it's something that I would consider if I was looking for, again, an optic in that price range, though in general I do tend to just buy cheaper stuff and run cheaper stuff. So again, I do recognize that there is a market for this optic, but it's probably going to be fairly niche. Someone that's looking for a mid-tier optic with an ACSS reticle but doesn't want the SLX line because it doesn't have the optical quality, but they're not going to be buying much more expensive scopes either. But with all of that out of the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think of the primary arms GLX or any other primary arms optics in the comments down below. And with all of that out of the way, guys, thank you once again for watching. I will see you in the next one. Peace off. Very little movement there, looks great. Felt good.